Hi, this is Catherine, and welcome back to Taking Tea with Catherine. I am drinking Goddess of Mercy Oolong tea today because I thought, after reading a book about tea and the very proper way to make it, which isn't the proper you may think, I decided to go for as careful as possible making the right proper way of making a good oolong tea, and I seem to have succeeded because it tastes very nice. I am not an expert. I do not have the taste, the palate of an expert, but I think I have somewhat of an idea of what a good oolong tastes like. I went to a really nice cafe that made proper oolong, so that's good. I'm doing a wrap-up today, and before I begin my wrap-up, I'm going to be a little passive-aggressive and say, please excuse the noise you may hear back here, or this way, because it seems someone has decided to do some kind of work, construction or not, in the hallway. I don't know what, but they seem to be making a bit of noise. So if you hear clanging of any sort or singing, please try to ignore it as I have been trying to ignore it. I don't want to talk over it. All right, let's be positive. Let's talk about the books I read this past month. And I stuck very much to my guns in that I did not want to read anything but nonfiction just for November, because it was nonfiction November. I like being on theme, and just like I did that with Victober pretty much, and it's great. I really enjoy it, and I think I got a lot out of it. I also think that while I did like it, it's kind of nice and a bit of a relief to be going into the next couple months where I will have certain themes that I'm going to, and I have certain, buddy reads, book club reads, etc. So I may, not be mood reading entirely, but I kind of like that I can shake it up a little bit too. So either way is very good, and I feel somewhat successful. I broke a record. I don't say that you have to read as many books as I've read this year. I don't say that I have to read as many of these books next year, for instance. But it's still kind of fun to break a record. So I've cracked my 75 book a year record to my recorded knowledge. And I'm about to hit 80, which is nice. Which means I might even make more than 80, which is pretty amazing. But we're talking about last month. So 9 books in November that I completed. Mind you, 2 of them I had made a lot of headway beforehand. So, and one of them I had begun in October. But the very end of October. So that was mostly November. So yes, 9 books, all nonfiction. Out of them, 7 of them can be considered memoir, and 8 of them were written by females. So I don't know. I thought that was an interesting statistic. I don't know why, being that I've read a lot of nonfiction in my life, that I thought it would be mostly male writers that I was going to be reading in Nonfiction November, but I was obviously wrong. I stand very much corrected. So yeah, 8 out of 9. Something else. So let's talk about some of these books. I actually did already talk about most of these books. I don't know if I'm going to pick a favorite or least favorite here. Most of them were deemed around 4 stars for me, or thereabouts. And they were slightly different in each way, so it's kind of hard to compare. As far as cover art, there are kind of a few that I really, really loved. And I mean, Foxes on Earth, I think, is gorgeous and so autumnal. And How to Be a Good Creature. I mean, I still can't get enough of this. I really did, honestly, want it because of its cover. Thankfully, it ended up being a good book. As far as my library books, I'm going to talk about this in a moment. This is actually quite pretty. I think the plastic cover kind of takes away from it because it makes it too shiny, but still pretty. I hate to say I enjoyed certain books because 2 of them were kind of sad-ish memoirs about dealing with issues. For instance, Little Panic, about having anxiety since childhood. It's not exactly a fun read, but I still, I guess, related to it, kind of enjoyed it. I talk about bookish hypochondria, and sometimes you think, hypochondriacs seem to revel in not feeling well, but sometimes it's not that, because this writer, Amanda Stern, was speaking of, and I don't know if I mentioned this last time in my check-in, she mentions along the lines of she wanted as a kid to have something physically, visibly wrong with her, which sounds backwards. Who wants to suffer? And once you have something like that wrong with you, you really do regret it. But I get it, because she was basically saying no one really saw what was wrong with her, because it was all basically internal, how she felt. It wasn't really visible outside. So for her, for people to really get what she was going through, she felt like she would need some sort of visible indicator. And that's kind of sad. So I don't always think that being a hypochondriac is necessarily a plea for attention, like in a, I want attention, I want attention. Sometimes it really means I just need someone to understand that I'm going through something. So that was both sad but really interesting. And of course, Foxes on Earth talked a lot about horrible things that happened to foxes, but I still thought it was a great read. Hello Stranger by Barbara Moran, about her struggles of being autistic and not knowing it for so long, was quite interesting, but also kind of sad, but not always sad. Sometimes she actually quite had enjoyable things to think about too. So you have to take the good with the bad, I guess. So the two books I haven't really discussed here, I finished since my last check-in, and one of them I had seen, I don't know, I guess in a bookshop, so I took it out of the library. Not that I like buying books, and I buy a lot of books, but sometimes I just want to take it out of the library, and I don't know if I'm going to like it that much. And this one, even though I liked it, I kind of have to say I'm glad I took it out of the library. And that's Alone Time by Stephanie Rosenblum, 4 Seasons, 4 Cities, and the Pleasures of Solitude, which I thought, as I do like travel memoir, and I do like the idea of traveling alone, I thought this is for me, so I took it out. And it is still, it's still quite relatable in many ways. As I've probably mentioned before, I've taken 2 trips that were considered solitary trips in my lifetime. I've been on airplanes by myself more times than I'd like to be, but sounds like I'm such a big traveler, but I'm not. Most of the time it's to see somebody, to visit somebody, so I'm on my way, so I won't be alone. But twice I went to London on my own, and my last solitary trip to London was about 5 years ago, so it's been a while. And I've enjoyed both ways. I've enjoyed being with people, and I've enjoyed being by myself. This book actually was helpful if you are thinking about planning a trip to somewhere, and you're on your own, and you're thinking, will I like this? And some people won't, honestly. Some people just don't like being alone, so it's probably not for them at all. But for anyone who thinks they might, this book could actually help. So the writer is a journalist. She's a travel writer, I think for the New York Times. She lives in New York. So it's not like she's just, never traveled and decided to just take this on. It wasn't like a super experiment, but she decided to go to 4 cities, as it says in the title, and to, experience it as a solitary person. And that in itself is pretty rewarding. So she went to Paris, and she went to Istanbul, Turkey, which I've always wanted to go to. And I've been to Paris, but very little, very briefly. Florence, Italy, another place I've been very much wanting to see. And then she did a little bit of alone time in her home city of New York City, which is where I live and where I've spent a lot of solitary adventures, enjoying actually. So I thought, okay, that'll be good. And it was. And I have to say it started out pretty well going to Paris, because there's just so much you can take in a sensory way in Paris that I totally understood. How many times have I said totally? Yeah, I think that she did a good job with Paris, and she made a lot of discoveries that she wouldn't have done on her own. She found a book by Book Crossing, which is a thing that I've thought about getting involved in and then I never really have, where I think you put little stickers in your book and you leave a book somewhere out in the wild for someone else to find. And someone else might find this book and see it, and then maybe they'll pass it on themselves, or another book. So it's like a little free library, except it's just an individual book that you could just stick anywhere. So she found one when she was by herself in Paris, in a little park, I think. And that's cool. And she intersperses both her experiences with just talking about solitary travel in general, and also talking about women traveling alone, because that is a different animal than males being on their own. But even though it was still good as time went on, I didn't think the Istanbul part got me as much. I think there were bits that were good, but I don't know. I was flagging a little bit. I went up a little bit in Florence, because just talking about some of the art that I've always wanted to see in Florence and the bits, and talking about the Stendhal syndrome, which I've read a bit about and have almost experienced myself. And then, of course, in New York, there was a part where she explores the West Village, and I've always thought that if you have a day off, whether you live in New York or you're on your own as a traveler to the city, it is the village, and particularly the West Village, is a great place to explore on one's own. So I was glad that she chose that. But I don't know. I feel like it was a good book, but it wasn't. I don't know. I can't say why. And I read other reviews about it too, and it was like they were saying, "Oh, this book doesn't know what it is." And I wouldn't say that particularly. I think she got what she was aiming for. But it almost hits 4 stars for me. I think I would give it 4 stars in. When I say stars, I'm talking about basically Goodreads, because that's where I do a lot of my starring right now. And they don't have a half-star system, which makes it difficult, because when you think a book is something and a half, but then you kind of have to choose which way you would go, because you can't actually mark it. So, in this case, I would probably mark it 4 stars, but to myself, I would say 3.5, because it was good, but it just wasn't really good to me. And yet, it wasn't bad at all. It was a fun enough diversion, and it did make me think about going somewhere on my own again, which I probably won't do in the near future. But it got me more curious again, which is always good. Always be curious. Speaking of travel memoirs, because this book is probably more of a travel memoir than an instructive book, although it is instructive in many ways. So we reached the book that I give a 5-star, which is I think the only one on Goodreads this month that I've given a 5-star to. But it lags between 4.5 and 5 for me in certain parts. And that is Henrietta, why can't I say names? Henrietta Lovell Infused, Adventures in Tea. Now this is up my alley, because you guys know that I was reading, do I have it here? Yeah, I'm not going to start looking. I was reading another book about tea that I've had for a billion years, and it's a bit bigger, and I started it, and I said, this is pretty good, but I'm still not engaged the way I thought I was going to be. And this book sucked me in from the very beginning. As soon as I opened it, I said, oh, man. So, basically, Henrietta Lovell, the tea lady, which is basically her title, or the rare tea lady, because she's head of the rare tea company. She was earlier in her life in the whole corporate world, getting ahead, working hard, blah, blah, blah. And then she was wanting to get into tea. She really liked tea and wanted to work with tea, and she hadn't reached for it yet, but her father died. And he died kind of young, younger than expected. And she realized he had so many things in life he wanted to do and didn't get a chance to get to it. So she says, I'm not going to stop. I'm not going to hesitate anymore. I'm going to become the tea lady. And I'm going to travel the world to all kinds of far-flung places and near-flung places and learn about teas and find some really good teas, do all the sourcing, and source restaurants as well. And she does it. And even though she makes this resolution, she also gets sick herself. And numerous times. I think twice she had to deal with cancer. And so far she survived it. Seems like quite a survivor. She also apparently got hit by lightning in South America when she was younger. So, wow. So, of course, anyone who's traveling to different tea estates and different tea gardens around the world is going to be somebody I want to read more about. And in that sense, I really did love it. There were so many different places in China, India, Sri Lanka, Malawi, Nepal, Cornwall, etc. I could go on and on, but there are so many places around the world that she goes to find tea, and she really makes relationships with people who are making the tea or growing the tea, and I thought that was good because she really is, sourcing and encouraging local businesses, local to their area. You know what I mean? Not these big corporate type tea companies. Yes, and in on the way she gives a little bit of history about tea, and she gives advice on how to make different kinds of teas and tea cocktails too. So that's kind of cool, and not just tea as in Camellia sinensis, which is the main plant that tea is made from, but she also does go into herbals, like rooibos and lemongrass, etc. And I thought that was great because, as you know, on this channel, when I'm drinking tea, with the exception of today and some other days, I don't usually get a chance to record in the day most of the time. Most of the time I have to record in the evening, so I have to drink herbals. And I like to know that it's accepted by a tea person, so that is great. So yes, the adventures were fun to read about. She did have one weird romantic encounter with someone in a train in Italy, and it was like, what? When I read that part, I was actually sitting in Central Park on a nice day reading that, and I said, okay, I didn't need to know that. But, everybody has their preferences to what they like in a memoir. I have to say, I appreciated more the bits about her visiting places where tea is grown, more than the restaurants that she sources tea to. Even though I'm sure the tea is amazing, I would love to try it. In fact, she goes to one place in Tarrytown, New York, that I had been to. Not the restaurant itself, because you need to have, $1 million to be able to afford it, and also reservations. But I was on the property where they grow things, and I went to a little cafe that is part of the area. I don't think the tea I had was from her company because it wasn't amazing. I think it was like Earl Grey or something. I don't know. But that place, yeah, it was very, again, not for the common folk. So a lot of the restaurants she goes to and brings her tea to aren't for the everyday person. So it kind of, even though I understand that this is her way of bringing tea to people who may have not expected to suddenly enjoy tea at that point in their dining experience, and I like that, but I'm also kind of like, oh, I wish there was more about places that were more accessible to people like me, but I do understand. So her main theme is to take the time to make your tea properly, to kind of avoid using tea bags when possible, if at all, and to get the best possible tea quality that you can, which I've always agreed with, but I don't know if it's realistic for most people. I'm going to compare it also to reading books. So those of us who really love to read take time, even if we have hectic, crazy schedules, to read because we need to. So those who love tea and want to enjoy it, just like people who like really good coffee, will probably take the time to invest in making a good cup at some point. But that may not work as an everyday thing. For instance, I get up in the morning, I can barely move, and I have to get to work most days. I have to get dressed, I have to get in the subway. I usually don't end up having my first cup of tea until I'm at work. And I won't have the time or the ability as an everyday worker to bring all the tea things and put it together and clean it out later. I mean, I'm not saying it's impossible, but it's highly improbable, and I don't know. So I think that it's great, and I will try to continually do the whole make the good oolongs, and try to buy the really good teas. I still think, because I know she kind of put down a lot of flavored teas because you don't know what exactly it's being flavored with in most cases. But I also think that while it's good to reach for the best possible teas that you can enjoy, especially if you love tea or like it at all, I also think that not everyone can do the whole shebang. So someday, I hope, if I can budget it in my tea budget, if I have a tea budget, I want to, I would like to try some of her teas and see if it is as quite as amazing as it was brought out to be. I imagine it is. I imagine it really is. But I also feel that I'm not going to put myself down just because sometimes I enjoy a nice hearty breakfast tea in a bag. One of her arguments is sometimes the bag, you'll taste paper. And I said, well, maybe I don't mind that so much. I love the smell of books. Maybe I don't mind the taste of paper a little bit. I don't know. So again, though, reading the book did make me happy. And she wasn't about shaming people. It was just, though I appreciate it very much and I wouldn't mind buying it and reading it again, or at least referring to it now and then, I also think that it is hard to just reconcile with being a semi-poor person who is just already overspending on books and may not be able to do quite the same with tea. But at the same time, it was nice to go on her adventures, and it's nice to have something to reach for sometimes. Yes. So anyway, that was my month. And guys, let me know if you've read any of these books, whether it was this month or any other month, what you think. Especially if anyone read that book, Infused. Because it was probably my highest rated one of the month. And I know I said a lot of things that were maybe not as positive. Perhaps I really did like the book. And I really would love to just get back on my, crazy purist tea person agenda. But yeah, so if you like any of these books, or if you have anything to discuss, go for it. This is Catherine from Taking Tea with Catherine, and may your days be filled with good teas. Have a lovely day.